Yeah, guy. Streams of Life podcast. Chris Anthony with you here. Tuesday, early evening. Jamming on a sunny, warm Southern California afternoon. Hot day today out here. That's what I'm talking about. That's right. Streams of Light podcast. We're live streaming on YouTube. So if you're listening on YouTube and you like the content, make sure you go down and subscribe to the channel. Set your alerts there and set your alerts. And also live streaming from Facebook Live. If you're on either of the platforms, send me a chat and would love to hear from you. And yeah, so here we are on a slightly warm early Tuesday evening, live streaming from beautiful San Juan Capistrano, where the swallows go. And this is Revelation Studios. And we're looking today at, again, going back to the mind and the power of the mind. One of the things I want to look at is that power of our minds and how that can affect us. You know, one thing I've said multiple times over and over again is that the music and the film of the day is full of what I would call loaded, infused statements about reality. I was watching that great classic, The Illusionist, with Edward Norton. And I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It's a pretty good movie. And again, there's always these statements that are in these songs and movies that just are dripping with truth and reality. And I was so flabbergasted when I heard them say this. There's a scene in the movie where Ed Norton is his character, is out in the streets, and the kids of this, the setting is, I believe it's in England, and or somewhere around Europe there. And the setting is older, a throwback to an older time. And the kids come up on the street begging for money. And it was amazing. You know, they ran up to him and they said, give us something, they said to his character. And he looks at them and he said, do you think you're poor? That's what the illusionist said to him. Do you think you're poor? Let me show you something. And then he went on to do, you know, an illusion trick, you know, that magicians and illusionists will do. He began to like pop coins out of a handkerchief and started tossing them to each one of the kids and then spilled a whole pile of them on the ground. But when I heard him say, do you think you're poor? I was just like, whoa, the thing hit me like a ton of bricks. And I'm like, you know, this is something I've been thinking of, is what we think we become. What we think we become. If we think we are poor, if we think we are alone and miserable, if we think we are a victim, if we think that the world is against us, if we think we don't have anything to offer, if we think we're stuck in the same old job, in the same old town, in the same old situation, well then, that's what we will eventually end up realizing. It's all about mentality. If you were to take several wealthy people and follow them around, interview them, I think you would learn something interesting about wealth. Though it can be inherited, those who maintain it or have it in some shape or form have created it. It's the same thing with relationships. It's the same thing. Just, it's a brush stroke for life. So I love what the illusionist says to those kids. Do you think you're poor? Wow, I hope those kids were listening. I know it's just a movie, but just amazing to me how powerful the mind is and how, in a very unconscious way, we are creating our own reality. in a very unconscious way, we're creating that reality. So I am here to say enough is enough. No more poor talk, no more poor thought. And wealth, granted, if all you were after was money, you wouldn't find a lot of satisfaction, because wealthy people, again, as I mentioned the other day, wealthy people do not necessarily have it easy, in the sense of money can't buy you love, as the Beatles sang. It cannot necessarily buy you health, although you might be able to pay for some top-notch doctors. But there is another kind of wealth that's not about money. And that's the wealth that I'm after. I hope it's the wealth that you're after. This kind of wealth. I'm going to give you a couple of depository notes in the bank of this other money reality that I'm talking about. One of the big deposits in this account of non-money wealth is peace and bliss. Wow. Get that and you get a lot. Contentment. Get that and you get a heck of a lot. Also, the kind of relationships that bring you great joy, vital, wonderfully enriching relationships. These are things that make the soul wealthy. If we think that we are simply the body, remember, we're a soul or a spirit having a bodily experience. If we think so much in body terms, we forget who we are. Because we're not a body. The body is the temple. It's a beautiful thing. And so we treat it as best as we possibly can. We clean it. We feed it well. We exercise it. We trim nails and hair and things like that. And really, to show your body a great deal of respect does something for your own body chemistry. But the body is not the end all. And this is something that I notice so much in not only news media today, but even in health. I have a big revelation coming down from Revelation Studios right now. Did you know that a lot of people that are into health and wellness, underneath the hood of that powerful, powerful philosophy is a fear of cessation or bodily pain and death? I know that's a hard thing to accept, but it's something I've noticed, and I've looked often at not only my own life, but some of my friends who are very enthusiastic about health. And what I've noticed in many cases is that though good health is very important, and though we should focus on eating right, etc., if you've ever run into someone who is a little bit over the top on food and supplements in the sense of health and wellness, the question is what is driving that? And I would suggest to you that it is just more than just wanting to be healthy. Because there's sometimes a deep unrest and fear of death or disease or bodily pain, which I'm not saying that these things are unusual or shouldn't happen. They're very common. None of us want to die. None of us want to feel terrible pain and injury or disease. But we have to realize what is behind the motivation for our desire for wellness. Because we create wellness in the mind with our state of being, which affects the nervous system in our body and releases all kinds of chemicals. And, this is, food is important. Yeah, definitely eating pure is important, and not abusing the body in any shape or form, causing it unneeded pain or suffering through various means. And we don't need to cover all that, but behind the curtain, in the subconscious depths, the region of the dark ether of our deep thoughts, resides sometimes, unfortunately, a very, very deep-seated fear. And you can eat all the good foods you want. Have you ever noticed that some of your friends that are a little over the top on health and wellness, as far as it seems like an obsession to them, have you ever noticed that a lot of these folks are really struggling? And this is a trap, and I've fallen into this. I think what oftentimes happens to us is we get sick at some point. And because we suffer, we do, I think, the right thing and the smart thing. We start to look at food as medicine. But we have to go back to square one, that attitude, as I was talking about before, when the illusionist said, do you think you're poor? Let me teach you something. Do you think you're sick? Do you think you're unwell? We have to realize that our mindset creates those realities more so than food will fix it, or, you know, anything, any respective thing. Like, we have to realize that our attitude creates wealth more than just, you know, going out and getting degrees or filling out thousands of applications or resumes or whatever. You know, these things, there's an attitude behind. When you see someone who is very wealthy or very healthy, oftentimes what you will find is it's almost like this vibration, this like, they don't focus on these negative things. They don't. You don't get healthy by dreading what might be going on in your body and freaking out and Googling every time you get a little pain or ache. So yeah, the mindset's so important. And man, so that's something that just popped into my head when I was watching The Illusionist, and I thought I'd have to share that. Something that also blew my mind the other day. I was outside, and in my own yard, I have, I've been in the place I'm at now for about 3 years. And I have the most amazing perennials. I don't know if you guys know what perennials are. Perennials are, they're basically plants that grow and come back, you know, every year, so kind of rain or shine. As a matter of fact, I have this one planter box that has, it's amazing. And it's like, it's got nothing, you know, at first I wondered, why is that planter box just empty? There's no irrigation or anything. There's nothing in there. But lo and behold, sometime in early summer, late spring, early summer, man, it's like that planter box just fills up in a day. Like, it's amazing. It just goes from nothing to this huge, like, I don't want to say bush, but beautiful plant with beautiful, like, flowers. They look like honeysuckles, and they're really amazing. They're kind of like a, not violet, but kind of like a reddish, kind of deep pink kind of color. And I even noticed this year, two of them popped up out of the driest, hard-packed dirt. I can't even look, I planted a white sage plant because I thought it'd be nice to have a little white sage to, you know, pluck the leaves and, you know, kind of make my own sage, you know, smudge sticks. And I can't even get sage, which grows like pretty much with no water and like in the desert, you know, the kind of the arid Southern California region. I can't even get sage to grow there. And these things just pop up like there's no tomorrow. And it's like they don't even need water. So I was thinking about perennials, and I was like, man, perennials are amazing. And perennials, actually, there's a term, the term perennial is actually big in the spiritual world. I'll touch on that in a second. But as I was kind of like looking at different interesting facts about plants, I came across this news article. It had some interesting quotes. Like violets. I know violets is a favorite of many people. Violets can be smelled only for a few moments at a time because they get their scent from ionon, which shuts the smell receptors off after stimulating them. So after a few breaths, the scent pops up again, but the brain registers at a new stimulus. So every time you smell a violet, it's like you smelled the first time. It's a really interesting thing. Another interesting one that I came across was the cacti, you know, because a lot of cactus around Southern California here. The cactus, there's 1,750 species of cactus that exists, or cacti, I should say. And 1,749 are native only to the Americas. So it's interesting that out of those 1,750, 1,749 are only from the Americas. So that's kind of, I was fascinated by that. So when you think of the Americas, when you think about, North and South America, think about, we're the cactus, producing continent here. So what else? I was looking at perennials, see if there's anything else interesting. The ghost orchid has no leaves or stem and is simply a system of roots when it is not flowering. So that's kind of wild. An orchid without leaves or stem? It makes me wonder how, I've never seen that. Does it just float? Obviously the stem is probably the roots. There's like a root system that comes up that to give flowers. I can't imagine there not being a stem, but so it's probably like roots and they're probably wound or something like that. What else is interesting in here? Well, here's an interesting one when it comes to hunting and wartime. Acontium is a genus of over 250 flowering plants so poisonous that its toxins were used in arrows and spears to kill wolves, and henceforth giving the nickname wolf's bane. So that's interesting. Hey, here's another interesting one. Hate to talk about the S word, but it's called the suicide plant. It's the Gympie. Gympie is an Australian shrub that got that name. Its sting can last for years and is so agonizing that people have been known just to end it all after touching it. I don't know if that's true, but it drives you crazy. Got to have a way out of that, Clovers. Everyone knows about four-leaf clovers. They have twice the amount of chromosomes that humans have in our chromosomes. And because of their crazy reproductive habits, it's almost impossible to figure out if four-leaf clovers are genetic traits or caused by the environment. So hard to say. There's some species of bamboo flower bamboos that only flower once in decades. And they do so simultaneously across the entire planet, regardless of location or climate. Isn't that wild? That kind of reminds me, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking Avatar. Remember, the Avatar movie was cool. It was really cool in that sense because the plant life is all connected, and it's like a network. If you look at a tree, and you look how the tree goes into the ground, there's a root system. I don't know if you know it, but it's very much like the human body in that we have a brain and we have lungs, and trees are kind of like that. I think one is reversed. I think we're kind of like an upside down tree, if I remember right. But the movie Avatar really sort of, emphasized this concept of the concept of these trees and plant life communicating. So fascinating to me. And in just a minute, I'm going to talk about how spirituality is very much like this bamboo flowering simultaneously across the entire planet. It's what we call in spirituality the perennial tradition, or the perennial philosophy. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back, and we're going to look at the perennial tradition. Streams Light Podcast. Be right back. right, Streams of Light podcast. And going back into the perennial tradition, or really, I just want to back up for a second and mention a couple people who've been very instrumental in my spiritual journey. You know, sometimes we read books, not so much to progress spiritually as much as we read books to identify with others on the truths that we've already realized. Because, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is the practical interaction of spirituality versus the head knowledge, which in the West we're really into head knowledge. And in the East, and not just in the East, but if you look at guys like Richard Rohr, the Franciscan friar, he is someone who talks about orthopraxy. That's a funny word. Orthodoxy means correct truth, sort of, so to speak. And orthopraxy has more to do with the fact that lifestyle and practice are so much more important than a verbal or mental orthodoxy. So I love Richard Rohr because he started talking about the perennial tradition. I was just talking about perennials in my yard that just pop up. And then I heard another favorite writer of mine, great man of religious contemplation, Swami Vivekananda. I heard him talking about something that sounded very perennial. He was talking about this certain path in the East, in the yogic tradition, where, you know, if any of you have practiced any of the yoga asanas or been on that eightfold path of Raja Yoga, you know that there's a very amazing practical application of doing these asanas, these positions, and feeling that peace and that bliss. Just a wonderful thing to practice these things. And Vivekananda at one point in his experience said that even if human beings were to be temporarily wiped off the face of the planet and were to reemerge somehow, he said somehow these deep truths that he was talking about in his tradition, in the yogic path, he said these would reemerge. These asanas, the Vedantic thought, all these things that are so integral to the Eastern influence and the Eastern thought, they would all reemerge. I love that. And Richard Rohr felt the same way. Now, he talked about the perennial tradition, and he talked about all the mystical branches of the different religions. The mystical branches are growing off of the foundational branches of the different faith families around the world. For example, if you take Islam, for example, what do you have? The mystical branches would be the Sufi mystics. That's where we get Hafiz and Rumi. If you look at Judaism, for example, you have Kabbalah. And if you look at Christianity, for example, you have the Christian mystics like St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and Julian of Norwich. If you look at, well, I don't want to say Hinduism, because in Hinduism you have it is just a very mystical tree. Of course, there's always going to be the fundamentalists and so on and so forth. But all these faith families around the world have these mystical branches. And the amazing thing is there's all these similarities in the mystical branches of these different faith families. And that's what we're looking at when we're looking at the perennial tradition. Because, for example, almost any monastery across the world, doesn't matter if it is Christian or Islam or whatever it is, those mystical branches of those devotees, those disciples, they will all find a very similar common thread. Their orthopraxy will be very similar in certain ways. For example, the Discalced nuns of the Carmelite monastery up in Carmel, California, discalced nuns who wear no shoes. In Carmel, where it's freezing half the time. And these ladies, older ladies in the monastery close to the beach where the wind blows in from the ocean. The place is freezing, people. And these ladies don't wear shoes. Kind of amazing when I think about that, because I think about how in many, many spiritual traditions, what have they realized? The blessing of going without shoes. We see in the 60s, especially in California, many of the hippies walking around barefoot. We're starting to see an upsurgence again in the West Coast and all around the United States of yogis, people doing yoga, who have realized, especially we see it more in California where the weather's a little more temperate. We see people walking around talking about grounding and talking about the earth's energy. And so these are elements of the perennial wisdom that is not necessarily taught by any one religious body. These are things, folks, that are perceived, just like those perennials that just popped up in my yard, water or not, and start blooming. These are the common threads of all faith families that will eventually help us to realize we're all one. Matter of fact, that was one of the things I liked about Richard Rohr. And I'm going to just read this little quote here. He emphasizes the alternative orthodoxy, and he refers to it as orthopraxy. I already talked about that. A belief that lifestyle and practice are much more important than verbal or mental orthodoxy. And then he talked about the perennial tradition or perennial philosophy. And that forms the basis of much of Rohr's teaching. The essential message of his work focuses on union of divine reality with all things and the human potential and longing for this union. I love that. So divine reality with all things. And so this is an interesting thought, because so what we're looking at here is we are looking at how Rohr and others have realized, and this is across, folks, this is across all religions, across the whole world, that most of them who have gone into the mystical elements, to the mystical branches of their respective, faith families, they see this divine union through all things, through everything you do, through eating your food, exercising, your work. Brother Lawrence, found it in his work. The practice of the presence of God. He was a dishwasher, and he found the presence in his dishwashing. The common themes of how these monastics and these people find divine power through stillness, contemplation, meditation. They all have that. Even the Buddhists who say, well, there's no God per se, they do the meditation. The chanting, even the Buddhists chant. The Hindus chant the names of God. The Christians chant the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus, have mercy. Lord Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on us. So there's these universal perennial themes that keep popping up in faith families all across the world. You know what? People are gravitating there. It's like magnetism. They're gravitating towards spirituality and power and peace and bliss, and they all find a common thread. This is perennial wisdom, the perennial tradition. And I love how Richard Rohr talks about how it could be found in everything. That divine reality, the union with divine realities through all things, reminds me of a very beautiful story that Sally Kempton, she's one of my favorite authors, she wrote a book called Awakening Shakti, and she talks about the Krishna story, which is pretty foreign to us here in the West. It's becoming a little more common now, but a lot of us don't know the Krishna story. In the Krishna story, what happened was Krishna was a young boy, and then as he kind of got to his teen years, he was adored by everyone. The older women just loved him like a son. Of course, the teenage girls were enamored with him. And we had the guys, his friends, just really, he was they were also endearing to him. So everyone loved Krishna. In particular, Radha loved Krishna. Matter of fact, she fell in love with him and he fell in love with her. And they had just a beautiful romance. And as it often happens in life, that romance didn't quite continue 100%. And when she was in the relationship, when Radha was in the relationship with Krishna, her friends, her female friends who were of the same age, were very attracted to Krishna. Of course, they did not speak of it. Matter of fact, they not only didn't speak of it, they were in line with her, and they suppressed their own feelings in order to show their friend the support for her love. But when the relationship ended, Radha was distraught, like many people. When a relationship ends, when there's loss of a lover, can be very, very difficult and painful. And Radha was distressed. It was at that time that her friends rallied around her. Of course, before they suppressed those feelings and comments, and now, not that they were speaking directly of them, but they were walking side by side with her and through the valley of the shadow of this pain as she was searching for that love of Krishna. And the interesting thing was she was obsessed. Teenage obsession, you know what I'm talking about. Everything, she couldn't stop thinking about it, thinking about him all the time, her mind on him, her thoughts, waking up, thinking about him, just kept coming back to him. And so at one point in time, and I love this story, and Sally lays it out in her book, so if you like what I'm saying here, you should get Sally Kempton's book here. And finally, at one point in time, everywhere they went, they would see Krishna. Now, this is powerful because for those of us in the West, we can sometimes stumble over this because we don't realize the power of metaphor and how in the East, metaphor is used to teach a higher truth, a higher reality. So I will just say to those in the West who struggle with this, you may be hung up on, well, you can't worship that guy. Forget about that. Just think of Krishna as divinity, as the divine one. Because everywhere they went, they saw him in the grass, in the trees, in the cows, everywhere, in each other, in every person, in everything, in their food. And this is what Richard Rohr was talking about. This is the most beautiful thing. It's finding the cosmic beloved in everything. In everything. And so this is what happened in the story of Radha with Krishna. And when I heard that, when I actually have the audiobook, Sally Kempton's book on Awakening Shakti, when I heard that chapter on my audiobook, I was driving, I just had to turn it off and just think about that, chew on that, because that was so powerful to me, because the answer is not necessarily in any one person or any one thing. The answer is in that universal awareness, that universal consciousness, that unitive field where you begin to see all things as one. You begin to see the divine. If that's what your goal is to find the divine. If you knock, it'll be open. If you look for it, you'll find it. And the lesson will be everywhere. Like the Master Christ said, look at the lilies in the field. They're not struggling. They're clothed in this beautiful colors, and they're more beautifully arrayed than any of the leaders in the world have ever been. And they're cared for with divine love. And look at you. You shouldn't worry about anything like that. Think of those birds. See divine love in the birds. When you look at the birds, they're not planning out their 401ks or their retirement funds. They're not making their next plan of attack on how to survive or what to get next. But everywhere they go, they're finding what they need when they need it. And they somehow stay dry at night. And their little nests hidden away under the trees and the little nooks and crannies. So divine love is everywhere. And if it's not divine love you're looking for, if it's just peace and bliss, eternal bliss, that's fine. It's everywhere. It doesn't have to be the word God or Christ or Krishna or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that. It's inside of you. It's inside of me. It's inside of all of us. And we're all in this together. We're all brothers and sisters. You know, I had a very amazing experience. I don't know if you guys have ever tried the QHHT, the quantum healing hypnosis therapy that Dolores Cannon found out about. I had a treatment a couple months ago from a person here locally who does it. And it was a very powerful experience. At one point in time, I felt like I was connected to this massive power grid. And I felt like I was one cell in this power grid. I hate to use that term. I hate to bring up the movie The Matrix, because in the movie The Matrix, it was the other way around. Everyone was in these little, they were in these little battery compartments, and the aliens had taken over the world, and they were just extracting the energy out of the humans. They were harvesting human beings like they were plants, you know, for their own benefit. But if you could think about that concept, but instead of being just asleep and not aware to your own reality, like the movie in The Matrix, they were not aware. They were living the software dream as they were in this little battery compartment for the aliens. If we flip that around, this is what it was like for me when I was under this QHHT therapy session. It was like I was connected to this power grid. And I was just like one little cell in a very powerful group of energetic beings, so to speak. I don't even know how else to describe it. And in that place that I experienced that, there was all power. There was all wisdom. There was all peace and bliss. Matter of fact, when the therapist started asking me questions, I remember thinking, it was so weird because there was me, the small self, the ego me. And I remember thinking, she asked me a couple questions like, where are you? What's going on? And she asked me, you know, like anyone would be like, hey, what's going on? Or what are you seeing? And there was part of me that was just chuckling and laughing. And when I was asked one particular question, I was like, oh, you don't understand. We don't think like that. That's not how it is here. I was part of this thing that was so huge and so powerful. It was like the divine collective. It was like, what if every one of us were just a cell in the body of God? And if the universe was God's body and we were just like one little teeny cell. But when we came to realize that we were somehow in communion or in communication with the brain, the master planner, the master, you know, the home base, I don't want to say the nuclear warhead, but you know what I'm talking about, the power, the source of all this. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I at that moment, I awoke that I was part of this huge grid. And you know what's funny is at that time, I felt like I was in complete bliss. I felt like there was nothing that I didn't know, but I also felt like there was nothing that I needed to know. I didn't feel like I needed to think about, but I just, like, all wisdom was there. All power was there. And it felt like I was actually connected to a grid. I literally felt this buzzing energy, even in my physical being at that time. It was really a powerful experience. But at that time, I could see the reality of that unitive field, of that union, of that oneness of everything. That makes up what we call God, or we call the divine. And it's quite a powerful thing. It's never going to disappear. Like Vivekananda said, Swami Vivekananda said, you know, even if human beings were wiped off the face of the earth and they somehow reemerged or evolved or whatever, these things would come back. We go down this path and we find these things over and over again. We find that perennial life. We find that divine life. Whatever we need to get to that place, if it's asana, if we need to do positions or certain meditations or certain chants, whatever it might be, we find it. And then we find out, you know what? The mind is powerful, like we talked about in the beginning. Do you think you're poor? Let me show you something. You're not poor. The mind is very powerful in that sense. But ultimately, we know that it's not so much about what our mind thinks half the time, because there's a lot of weak thoughts and things that go along, but it's more important that what we are and what we do makes up our own reality. And so knowing what we are, knowing that I don't have to go somewhere to find a truth or to find peace or to find bliss or to find God, that very thing is innate within me. Just like those perennial flowers that grow in my yard, they're there. When the winter is there, you don't see any sign of them, but they're there. They're underneath the ground. They're getting ready to pop up. It's going to pop up. It's inside of all of us. This divine reality. You don't need to go to some place or some group to find it. You can do that. It's good to be with other people of like mind. Birds of a feather flock together, and it's good to fly in the power of numbers. It's very important to pick well, to pick the group that bears the fruit of divinity. Be careful what you pick. Don't pick those that are self-deceived, that are caught up in pride or ego, but pick those that are filled with the things that you want for your own life. Pick those who know peace, not talk about it, but actually know it. You can see it on their countenance, the peace, the bliss. Pick those, not who talk about right living or righteousness or holiness, but pick those who in gentle humility say nothing of it, but only live it. Be around those people. Flock with those because that's who you are. So pick the flock. Fly with them. But realize that ultimately, even though it's good to gather in unison, that ultimately it's already inside of you. There's nowhere you need to go to get it. Which reminds me, it's just about time for me to go get some of my own life. So I'm going to sign off here. I got to crack in to the depths of my being and find that divine nectar. I do that twice a day in my Kriya Yoga practice and my meditation. That's what I do. Whatever you do, Tai Chi or prayer, supplication, the rosary, whatever you do, that's you. So you do what you do. I'm going to go get some of this myself. This is Streams of Light Podcast. I'm Chris Anthony. Don't forget, on YouTube, subscribe, like us on Facebook. Until next time, peace be upon you.